Today, we're diving into a massive global puzzle. Why is it that the world's warmest countries also tend to be the poorest? Let's unpack the really surprising link between climate and wealth. Okay, so let's just start with the big picture. If you look at pretty much any map of global wealth, like this one right here, something just jumps right out at you. You see this clear divide, right? The wealthier countries are all clustered up in the cooler, temperate zones, and the poorer nations, well, they're mostly gathered in the warmer, tropical regions. So why? I mean, it's a question people have been asking for centuries, and you just can't deny the correlation. The pattern is so consistent that it practically screams for an explanation. And look, this isn't just some vague feeling you get from looking at a map. The data is crystal clear. This chart shows that as a country gets farther from the equator, its GDP per capita tends to go up. Sure, you've got outliers, like tiny, super-rich Singapore, but they honestly just prove how strong the overall rule is. Okay, so what is really going on here? Well, over the years, a bunch of theories have popped up. They've become the usual suspects in this big global investigation into why things are so unequal. The most obvious explanation is, well, just the heat itself. I mean, get this. Some research suggests that for every single degree Celsius hotter it gets on average, a country's GDP per capita could shrink by more than 8%. That's huge. Heat makes hard labor absolutely exhausting, people call in sick more, and studies even show it can mess with our ability to think clearly. It just makes it harder to get stuff done. All right, another huge suspect? Disease. As you can see on this map, the burden of disease isn't spread out evenly at all. It's heavily concentrated in tropical regions. Nasty things like malaria and dengue fever just love warm, humid weather, and they can absolutely cripple a country's health system and its workforce. Then you've got the theory that's really popular these days. It's all about institutions. The idea goes something like this. European colonizers basically set up two different kinds of shops. In cooler places, where they could actually settle down, they build institutions to create long-term wealth. But in hot, disease-ridden tropical places, they build extractive institutions designed for one thing, to get resources out as fast as possible. And that left behind a legacy of poverty. But here's where that whole theory starts to get a little shaky. You look at the exceptions, and they're pretty glaring. Take Singapore and Hong Kong, hot, humid, intensely colonized, and yet they're incredibly rich. On the flip side, you have Ethiopia, which was never really colonized, but it's one of the poorest countries on Earth. Or Thailand, which also stayed independent, but it's poorer than its colonized neighbor Malaysia. It doesn't quite add up. So you end up with this really complicated web of ideas like you see here. And yeah, they all sound kind of plausible, but they've all got these glaring holes. It just feels like we're missing a key piece of the puzzle. So let's take a step back. What if the entire premise we started with is just wrong? What if the people living in these so-called warm countries don't actually live in extreme heat all the time? Just take a look at this. It's a temperature comparison between Lisbon, Portugal, and Nairobi, Kenya. You'd think Nairobi, right on the equator, would be way hotter, wouldn't you? But look at this. For a big chunk of the year, Lisbon, in temperate Portugal, is actually warmer. And hey, this isn't some weird fluke. Bogota in Colombia is colder on average than Madrid. Addis Ababa in Ethiopia is actually a bit cooler than Rome. Many of these capitals in tropical countries have surprisingly mild climates. So how is that even possible? Well, the answer, it turns out, isn't about looking at the map flat. We need to add a third dimension: altitude. It's all about the mountains. Okay, now this is where it gets really fascinating. On the left, you've got the terrain of tropical Colombia. On the right, we've laid population density over it. See that? The huge, flat tropical lowlands are almost empty. Where is everyone? They're living way up high in the Andes Mountains, where it's much cooler. And it's not just a Colombia thing. Let's zoom out to the whole of South America. You see the exact same pattern. It's like a bright line of human settlement running right down the spine of the Andes. And you see similar things in parts of Africa and the Middle East, too. People are clustered in the highlands. In fact, if you plot out the world's capitals, you see this incredible global trend. The closer a city is to the equator, the higher up it tends to be. For centuries, people in tropical regions figured out a brilliant adaptation. Move up, and you can escape the worst of the heat and disease from the lowlands. So this is a brilliant survival strategy, right? To escape to the mountains. But, and this is a huge but, it comes with a massive economic price tag. It basically creates what you could call a mountain poverty trap. First up, transportation costs. They just explode. Trying to build and maintain roads and railways through rugged mountains is insanely difficult and expensive. So what happens next? Trade gets strangled, both inside the country and with the rest of the world. And finally, all that geographic isolation means communities get cut off from each other, which breeds mistrust, division, and way too often, conflict. And look at this map of Africa. It just illustrates that last point so powerfully. Those brown dots are all conflict events, and you can see how they're just overwhelmingly packed into mountainous areas like the Great Rift Valley. The geography itself becomes a driver of conflict. So once you see this hidden factor, altitude, it just completely reframes the entire problem of global inequality. Suddenly, it's not just about heat or history, it's about topography. Okay, remember that complicated flowchart from before? Well, now we can finally plug in the missing piece. People go to the mountains. That single decision, driven by heat and disease, is what directly causes higher transport costs and more conflict. And those are the things that lead to poverty and weak institutions. Altitude is the key that connects everything. So here's the bottom line, the really crucial takeaway. For centuries, a lot of tropical nations were stuck between a rock and a hard place. A terrible geographical dilemma. They could settle the lowlands and get hammered by low productivity and disease, or they could move to the highlands and get trapped by isolation, low trade, and constant conflict. It was basically two different paths to the same destination, poverty. And you know what's so powerful about looking at it this way? It moves us away from just pointing fingers and arguing about history, and it points us toward real, concrete solutions that are tailored to geography. For countries in the mountains, the answer has to be massive investment in transportation. For countries in the hot lowlands, it's things like affordable air conditioning and wiping out those tropical diseases. Which really leaves us with one big final question to think about. We always talk about overcoming history, but maybe the real challenge is overcoming geography. If the physical land itself has shaped our economic destiny this much, how can we use our technology and our engineering to finally level the playing field and build a richer, more equal world for everyone, no matter where on the map they happen to live?